This podcast is recorded and produced in the township of Tiny, Ontario, on the traditional lands of the Huron-Wendat Nation and the Anishinaabeg people.
We want to thank the Indigenous people for their past and present stewardship of these lands and waterways, and look to their wisdom to guide us toward a future of harmony and good health for all beings that call Turtle Island home.
Constant desire to help others.
Relentlessly pursues knowledge about the disease.
Always looking for some way to help.
Just incredibly warm and kind.
Welcome to Originals More Than ALS, the show where we highlight the lives and experiences of the ALS community to spread awareness, education, and hope. I am one of your hosts, Flynn Mason.
And I'm the other host, Haley King.
And we're joined today by Rick Zwiep. Thank you for joining us, Rick.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here. It's a real privilege to talk with you both today.
Rick Zwiep comes from a successful 30-year background in the telecommunications industry, working in product management and technical sales for companies such as Gartner, MTS Allstream, Rogers, and TELUS. A curious man with studious tendencies, a love of books and new technology, and a drive to succeed, Rick has forayed into ALS advocacy to impressive results. Since his diagnosis in August of 2022, Rick has been featured by organizations such as Healthing.ca, Patient Voice, Brainstem Cell Therapeutics, and the ALS Therapy Development Institute. A graduate of the Canadian ALS Learning Institute, Rick proudly promotes ALS Society of Canada fundraising events such as the Revolution Ride and Walk to End ALS. Today, Rick sits on the board of directors for ALS Action Canada, a patient-led organization acting to amplify the voices of those living with ALS and their caregivers. He is also part of the Advisory Council for the ALS Superfund, which has raised over $1.8 million for ALS research since 2020.
For more on Rick, here are some words from his family.
What makes my dad special is his constant desire to help others. He's always willing to share his knowledge and experience, lend a hand, whether it's practical or emotional. And even when his help isn't asked for, it always comes from a place of deep care.
My dad is just incredibly warm and kind. He's always been curious and genuinely interested in the people around him. He's also a wonderful grandparent, so generous with his time and his energy, and my kids absolutely love being with him.
When I think about my dad, I think about someone who's always busy, always moving, kind of always looking for something to do, but really always looking for some way to help. So while it's been hard to see him not able to do all those things anymore, it's amazing to see how positive he remains and how he's really kind of embraced his new community and finding ways to help there wherever he can.
When Rick was first diagnosed with ALS, a community liaison person told us that in her experience, only the best people got this devastating disease. I agreed with her that this was true about Rick, but I didn't realize how much this kindness would influence his journey. Rick actively and relentlessly pursues knowledge about the disease, but also about research, resources, and all available supports for ALS. He tirelessly shares all of this information to benefit everyone he meets also living with ALS. He is an absolute wealth of knowledge, and his singular goal is to ensure that all pals and caregivers have all the information they need and every resource that's available to make their journey with ALS the best it can be. He fully lives up to our family's name for him as the mayor of ALS Town.
Rick was diagnosed with ALS in the summer of 2022, but he first began noticing something was off during the early days of COVID. In an effort to get out of the house, Rick was walking 10 to 15 kilometers a day until he started to feel a pain down the back of one leg that he had never experienced before. Assuming this pain was caused by age, overuse, or spending too much time sitting at a desk, Rick didn't initially give the pain much thought.
But it was getting worse and worse to the point where instead of doing 10, 15 kilometers, I could barely walk around the corner of my property to the mailbox. So I was like, something's really not good here. Now, looking back, I remember one time my walk was caught on video and I saw the way I was walking was kind of peculiar gait, peculiar stride. But I had just bought these new running shoes from Hoka. I don't know if you remember those. They kind of have a bit of a rocker to them. So I thought, oh, it must be these new running shoes that are making my foot kind of land flat on the pavement. I felt like I was slapping one foot down all the time. Well, it turns out this was the beginning of what's called foot drop, which is very common for limb onset, lower limb people as a first sign of something going wrong. It's an indication of muscle atrophy that's already taken place because of motor neuron death that's already happened long before that already. Anyhow, I didn't know that at the time. This was just looking backwards again.
At this point, Rick went to see his family doctor and was immediately referred to a general neurologist at a local hospital. This neurologist ordered a series of EMGs and nerve conduction studies, which Rick found to be quite fascinating.
Some people actually find them extremely painful. Mine was tolerable. I was sort of laughing in the first one because I was reminded of, do you remember in high school when we played with frogs' legs and put a battery on the frog leg and the muscle would jump?
Yep.
Or you saw a video of that
yes.
or whatever? This is what it felt like, right? They put a little electrode on your skin, give you a little shock, and you could see the computer was logging numbers on the side. And I saw a bunch of numbers highlighted in yellow. So I thought, oh, this is good. Whatever it is, they're measuring something and there's some parameters that are not right. So this will be good. We'll know what it is and how to fix it.
Right.
Then she wanted to do the nerve conduction where they stick a very fine pin into your muscles and turn up the volume on the computer and you can hear the nerves firing. And you can actually hear the sound like a big static burst on an old shortwave radio if you remember that. The only problem was the neurologist kept saying, oh, do you mind if I move the pin a little further up? A little further up. And she kept saying, oh, this is interesting. Do you mind if I move the pin a little further up? Till she was way up in the top of my bum cheeks, up in the muscles up there. And she's still kind of like, oh, this is very interesting. So I'm thinking, when a specialist says very interesting, maybe that's not such a good thing.
Right.
But we did several sessions like that.
Around 2021, Rick received 2 different genetic screenings at 2 different universities. To date, more than 100 genes have been identified that, when altered, can contribute to ALS. Each gene is considered to be part of one of 6 categories. These categories are definitive ALS gene, clinical modifier, strong evidence, moderate evidence, tenuous, and unassigned. The most common genetic causes of ALS are due to variants in 4 genes: C9ORF72, SOD1, FUS, and TARDBP. Rick was tested for just the most common specific genetic variants rather than receiving a full genome sequence.
There's this nervousness around, before the results come back, you kind of have this thinking and you're advised to buy insurance. Now would be the time to do it because you haven't got your results back yet. And then the results came back with nothing. There was no indication of any known genetic mutation related to ALS.
After these results, the general neurologist referred Rick to a more specialized colleague. Rick believes his initial neurologist may have strongly suspected ALS at that point, but perhaps didn't feel qualified to make the diagnosis due to the nature of diagnosing the disease. ALS is a diagnosis of clinical observation, meaning that the only way to diagnose it is by ruling out all other potential diagnoses through an intense series of testing. Rick's next neurologist was at Sunnybrook Hospital in Toronto.
Okay, I know Sunnybrook. It's a big hospital, lots of stuff there connected with the University of Toronto. So I met with a neurologist there in his office, and they did all the same tests all over again, do some muscle strength tests, push your hand this way, push your hand sideways, squeeze your fingers, squeeze my arm, push against my leg, all this kind of stuff, just to demonstrate strength and test your reflexes. I mean, pretty basic stuff when you're the patient, you don't know the context. You're thinking, oh, okay, well, this is just like a physical. I describe all my symptoms. By this point in time, I'm starting to get fasciculations, which are twitches, big twitches in the muscles in my legs. The ones on the top were particularly wonderful to watch because you could really see them, even through your pants. You could see the leg twitching.
Rick didn't think much of his fasciculations at first, thinking he must have just pinched a nerve. He figured he may need some form of surgery, but that it wouldn't be long until he was feeling back to normal. Unfortunately, after another several visits at Sunnybrook, a full-body MRI, and a consult with a neurosurgeon, he was left with the diagnosis of ALS.
Now, the weird thing for me was that my second last appointment was in April, and I'd gone by myself. At that meeting, he said to me, well, Rick, do you know why that other neurologist referred you to me? And I was like, oh, shoot, I never thought to ask. And I never played Dr. Google in any of this, so I never was putting 2 and 2 together myself. So he's like, well, I specialize in neurological disorders, particularly ALS. So at this point, my brain's like, oh, this isn't good. This isn't going in the direction I wanted. And I mustered up the courage to say, look, what's the likelihood that I have ALS? He says, well, I'm going to say you have probable ALS. So by myself, I'm in this little waiting room. There's a painting on the wall of a Toronto streetcar. I remember it forever now. Took a moment, took a deep breath, asked him a few questions. I was pretty composed, and I left. And it was only until I got to the parking machine to pay that I just started to, break down a little bit, and kind of I'm trying to pay, and I'm trying to get to my car and sitting there and have a moment to myself to compose myself so I could be safe to drive. But
all in all, it was over a year and a half from first seeing a neurologist to receiving the final diagnosis. This isn't an unusual timeline, but it's not ideal. Eligibility criteria for clinical trials often excludes people whose disease duration since the first symptom is greater than 2 years. The reasons for eligibility criteria vary, but researchers need to ensure they have a fairly similar or homogeneous group of participants with respect to symptoms.
Yeah, I think that's why, to me, it's such an important thing, like early symptoms and being able to recognize those and getting a diagnosis. I mean, I realize it is a difficult thing to diagnose, but
my journey was my journey because of the circumstances. I've met other
yeah.
People living with ALS who have had a much faster experience, literally
Yeah.
months,
Right.
just through luck and an opening in a schedule. And my hospital has probably 800 active patients. So when you put that in the context of 2 neurologists, it's a lot of appointments. It's a lot of people to see.
It is.
And that's
Yeah.
after they're kind of diagnosed, the
Right.
stuff, right? So
Yeah. So when you noticed that foot drop, you noticed it in the video, but prior to that, doesn't sound to me like you were really aware of any weakness yourself.
there were some hints looking back. One of my passions all my life since I was 5 years old, I learned to ride a bike, has been bike riding. So I had a habit for a long time of trying to ride 25, 30 kilometers on I don't have a racing bike. I just had a hybrid mountain
Okay.
bike. So
Yeah.
25 clicks is a decent ride. And I felt like I was slowing down, like I couldn't go as far, felt a little more tired. And I just figured I'm getting old, again, sitting too much at a desk. And then one of the other things I'd taken on quite a bit at that time was major home renovations. And I'd gone to Home Depot and got a big giant box of that drywall paste. For a big guy like me with some muscles, never would have been a problem. But as I was walking to the car, I was holding it with 2 hands in front of me, and I'm thinking, I'm going to have to stop and rest. This is heavy. I can't do this. What's going on?
Okay.
I
Yeah.
just feel weak.
Like weak in your arms versus your legs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know. That's the kind of thing I like to hear, right? Just, sort of those more subtle things that the people might look back and say, hey, wait a second, I think that might have been one of the earliest signs.
When we look back really hard now, my wife says, for 10 years, maybe even, you've been twitchy, Rick. When you're with a partner, you're laying in bed and stuff like that. And I'd often be like, get away from me. You're all twitchy. Who thinks about that, right? It's just whatever. Okay. I'll try and lay still. Maybe I'm just twitching because I can't settle in. But it turns out this was kind of early fasciculations probably that were not noticeable.
Rick is on the board of directors of ALS Action Canada and also sits on the organization's advocacy and membership committees. The ALS Superfund is ALS Action Canada's associated cause fund. ALS Action Canada is a patient-led organization that came to be as a group of patients across Canada felt that the world of ALS was too Ontario-focused.
At the time, there was issues with drug access. There was a disparity across the country in terms of the way patients were treated, diagnosis time, access to drugs, difficulties with private payers, insurance companies, difficulties with approvals going through Health Canada, through Canadian Drug Agency, PCPA, and it's down into the provincial registries, all this stuff. So they banded together and determined to form a patient-led organization. As many people understand, and as some of the leaders in the other provincial charities will say, a patient-led organization can say and take action in ways sometimes that a society can't because of the nature of the organization. Being patient-led, I think there's permission for you to be a little more feisty, a little more vocal, stronger in the way you bring the message across. than
Okay.
than some of the societies are able to do. That's not to say they don't fight as hard; they certainly do. But there was a really strong feeling amongst a number of people that more needed to be done, and the only way to do that was by being a strong patient voice.
Okay.
And at the same time, in the U.S., there was a movement happening as well with Sandy Morris and the Morris Principles around this idea of nothing about us without us, meaning
Okay.
patients needed to be more involved, have their voice heard in more places, not have this sort of stratified world of clinicians and research, and that had nothing to do. Patients were kind of an abstract, that people living with ALS and our lived experience was really, really important to bring into the dialogue. So that's how it came together.
ALS Action Canada was involved in letter writing campaigns and lobbying, largely in an attempt to get access to some medications that were not readily available at the time, and to encourage more clinical trials in Canada. Today, ALS Action Canada is a registered charity with a focus on demanding more tangible and urgent action for the ALS community. But the journey to become a registered charity was not necessarily an easy one.
The process isn't complicated, but when you're a volunteer patient-led organization, we've all got other stuff to deal with, like ALS. And
Yeah.
that's a full-time job in itself, right, for some of us.
Yes.
And so the charitable status was taking a while, and we discovered that we could raise funds partnering with another organization, that being an organization called Charitable Impact, which is a giving fund.
Okay.
And the beauty of that is that we could set up a mechanism where people could donate money to a cause fund, and then we could distribute that in the back end, sort of decoupled.
A cause fund is a pooled charitable fund that supports several organizations focused towards a specific cause.
Charitable Impact was I call it the banker or the mechanism to donate the money and retain the charitable status and issue the tax letters.
Oh,
And
okay.
then the ALS Super Fund was just the name we came up with, an umbrella name for the fund itself, to say, okay, we're not asking you to give money to ALS Action Canada. We want you to donate to the ALS Super Fund. And then our committees will work together with industry experts. We have a whole advisory panel of neurologists and specialists across the world, actually some leading voices, to help us advise on where we could best apply that money.
A lot of money has been raised for the ALS Superfund through the NHL, as Mark Curtin, former NHL player for Toronto, Vancouver, and Detroit, was heavily involved with ALS Action Canada after his 2018 diagnosis until his passing this past summer. Through the Alumni Association and through his friends from hockey, Curtin made tremendous strides in helping the entire NHL give generously to the cause of ALS. Maintaining momentum with the NHL partnership was a labor of love for Mark, and his legacy is one that ALS Action Canada is determined to continue.
But it ends up, and this is where the charitable impact and the ALS Super Fund become interesting, because one of the means to raise money is 50-50 draws at hockey games. You've seen them probably if you've ever been to a game or seen it on TV. But the lottery laws, because they're considered lotteries, often require that the funds that are raised in a 50-50 be distributed within the jurisdiction. Like, so Edmonton Oilers, Calgary Flames, the money has to stay in Alberta. We did some work with the Boston Bruins during the Four Nations tournament, and the stipulation was that the money had to stay in Massachusetts. And so we found partner organizations, the ALS Therapy Development Institute, ALS TDI, beautiful organization in Massachusetts. So money that we raised there, a lot of it stayed there. That has led us to strategically say, okay, we're going to keep this thing called the Super Fund as the giving machine, and then we have ALS Action Canada, which is like the umbrella organization that shepherds and stewards.
Yeah, no, that's great, Rick. Actually, your explanation right there is super helpful too.
Very helpful, yeah.
As part of a patient organization, we're very much, I think, all individually come to that with a spirit of transparency and accountability, because it's personal for us. Like, we are the organization. And so we want to make sure that the dollars we receive are well stewarded and they go to appropriate causes that are representative of the needs of the ALS community, and that we're transparent and accountable. And as we go forward, our strategy is being redeveloped right now. We're actively in committee working on our strategy. There's a lot of tensions, right? I mean, I know another charity organization in Canada that was able to raise a significant amount of money in their first year, was able to donate several $100,000 to research initiatives in Canada, but then they realized that that giving wasn't sustainable because of the family nature of the foundation, and giving
Okay.
tends to be a bit cyclical.
Yeah.
You can't keep going to the well sometimes, right?
Right.
And so
Yeah.
they pivoted and decided that they would take all of their funding and push it towards grants for families. Not necessarily huge grants, but certainly significant in
Yeah.
the range of a couple $1,000s to support whatever needs a worthy family could put forward. It's very challenging though because the needs are so great, right?
Oh, yeah.
And how do you determine the means?
Yes. Yeah.
I met a family in Manitoba, and they have a two-story house, and the person with ALS is upstairs, and they don't leave the house because they can't get downstairs anymore. They can't afford a renovation, and certainly an elevator is out of the question. And a stair lift becomes unworkable because you can't hold yourself up on it. And it's
Right.
and you say, well, get downstairs once then by being carried, and then get a bedroom and a place to wash down there. But that means you're kind of sleeping in the dining room and getting sponge baths for the rest of your life, which is not a quality of life that many of us aspire to, right? But just
Right.
heartbreaking scenarios.
Yeah. 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 But that's great work, and that's a good explanation of some of the challenges that you kind of face for a charity in terms of determining where they're gonna provide their support, right?
It's really hard, right? Because there's never enough
Yeah.
money to do everything that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And hindsight, you don't have the hindsight to say, "Oh, that was a good idea," or "That was a bad idea."
Yeah. Yeah.
We've
Right.
seen
Yeah.
how much money has been spent in ALS in research,
Yeah.
that hasn't it's borne fruit in the sense that we now know certain things don't work, but that's
Right.
kind of a difficult pill to swallow, so no pun intended, for people
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
say, all this
Mhm.
money and all this time, and we still don't have decent therapies, we don't have a cure, we don't have anything to even meaningfully slow the disease down except in certain very specific cases.
That's right. Yeah.
Right, yeah. In addition to their partnership with NHL teams, Rick's organizations are also associated with other supporters such as the pharmaceutical company Amalex, Mattamy Homes, and Canadian Tire, among others. We asked Rick how these other organizations provide support to the ALS community.
We're trying to be very careful about not ever putting ourselves in a position of appearing to be beholden, influenced, or otherwise biased by the donations.
Okay.
A commercial company that donates money, it's often because there's a connection. There's somebody in the ALS community who worked there or who knows somebody there, or some of the leadership in that company or their particular charitable bent has caused them to feel generous towards the cause of ALS. And then with the pharmaceutical companies, very careful on the amounts and under what terms we accept those. It's usually for something practical, like if we're going to have a lobbying event in Ottawa, which we've had one by ourselves as ALS Action and one together with the ALS societies across Canada, as you know, we'll accept a donation to help pay for sandwiches or pay for transportation and hotels or something practical.
Makes
But it tends
sense.
to be very directed, like very specific. Here's some money to do this
Okay.
thing. And we're also
Very good.
trying to walk a very clean line in terms of not endorsing any particular company or initiative or pharmaceutical effort. We're not qualified to make those endorsements, and there are places in the world where the charities are called on to be the ones funding some of the research, like really directly in lieu of government funding, perhaps, or
Right.
endorsing
Yeah.
a specific therapy that's come out of a country-specific university effort, and they feel a little
Yeah.
bit more attached to it because it's local and
Yes.
pushing those. We haven't had to deal with that much here yet.
Yeah, like regardless, we have to try to make sure that whatever is coming forward, that investments are made in that because it truly has a lot of promise, not because my friend owns the company or my friend is the researcher. I mean,
Absolutely.
basically,
Absolutely.
right?
But we
So
also
yeah.
know from our experience since LS Action Canada was formed, different research initiatives have been offered up to our Canadian clinics and researchers and neurologists, but some of them come with a cost to execute on that clinical trial that's more than the
Yes.
particular center can bear. I mean,
Yeah.
we live in a country where we're blessed to have a very good medical system. Obviously, lots of places where it can be improved on, and
Hmm.
reasonably funded in the sense that most of our normal needs are generally satisfied. But when you start finding out that your clinics sometimes, they would love to have another occupational therapist or even a first occupational therapist in the clinic, but
Yes.
they don't have the funding to pay the salary. Or if you give them a donation, they can only pay the salary for the first year, and they don't know how to sustain that over 5 years. Then you start to realize how granular and how challenging the funding models are for medicine and care in Canada and elsewhere.
During our first episode with Andrew Dundas, he spoke to us about accessibility within the home. Andrew had to move and make modifications to his new home to create an accessible space, something that he found was quite difficult due to the lack of resources available to guide him. Rick was also forced to move after his diagnosis, and we wanted to know how his experience compared to Andrew's.
That's a great question because it was difficult in many different aspects. The first one was just the mental one of the place you live in, the place you're comfortable at. I'll reach a point where sometimes you say, I think it's time we move, and there's a bunch of reasons and everybody can get their head around it. When you are looking at moving because a disease has put you in a position where the house you have just isn't suitable, then it becomes much more challenging. And because it's tied to your lifestyle too, right? Well, we had a call yesterday in our support group, and one of the fellows lives on an acreage in Alberta and has animals and kind of a rural country living. It's a whole different game than urban living. And urban
Yeah.
living in Toronto is way different than urban living in the suburbs or the outskirts of Toronto. My friend in Regina, Terry, is like, Rick, it's Regina. It's really cold here. I don't go out in the winter. It's just too cold for my body. So there's that context. Like you'd say, well, we should all just move to a warm climate for starters, and
Right.
and live together in a fully accessible shared complex, like an apartment building, townhouse complex or something. And there are those. There's one fellow who had
Okay.
ALS who had some engineering architecture background, and he got a fellow who was a pretty well off guy who funded development and building of this whole accessible apartment building. I think it's in the Boston area, and it's just a phenomenal idea, right? And I think in some countries
Mm.
they actually have government initiatives to support building accessible housing for that cross section of society, which is way larger than just ALS. Like my local Costco has 15 or so accessible parking spots. Can't ever find a spot that's open. Like,
Uh,
maybe there's just too many old people where I live, but it's interesting, right? When you're trying to navigate.
Rick wanted to stay in his home, so he looked into installing an in-home elevator. This would have been a $60,000 plus investment, but a positive one, as in-home elevators are in demand for multi-generational living, adding value to your home. However, Rick found that his house just wasn't suitable for that investment, and it was out of his family's price range. In addition, Rick's wife, Joyce, was concerned about having to carry the burden of maintenance required for their current home, so the pair decided they had no choice but to move. Rick was able to complete a series of renovations in the home in preparation for selling, but one of the most difficult things for him was cleaning out the garage full of his things.
So that was a whole journey for me of letting go of stuff that had accumulated. But it was funny because, as I was saying, I went to an Indigenous seminar this morning, and in the closing, they read a poem by a fellow whose name I can't remember. It's just out of my reach here. But it was about we are all stories, and made reference in the poem to, the accumulation of possessions has really got nothing to do with it. And
mm-hmm.
for a long time in our lives, we may pursue material wealth and stuff and buying things, and then the curse of Amazon, it makes this so easy. But when
Yeah.
you get into a situation where you're losing motor function, you're facing a terminal illness, your whole idea of materiality and what's important to you changes dramatically. But it's a process of letting go.
Rick knew he needed a bungalow, and there weren't many of those available where he and Joyce lived in Mississauga, so they relocated to Burlington. The home they purchased was built in the 1950s, creating a whole other set of maintenance issues requiring renovations.
And we had the house renovated for accessibility, but some of the things aren't real obvious. Like, where should the grab bars go? Is a grab bar behind the toilet useful when you're trying to get on the toilet from a wheelchair that's beside/in front of the toilet? You're using a transfer board, or once you're using a Hoyer lift, grab bar is kind of irrelevant. Where should they go in
Yeah.
the shower? We managed to make a roll-in shower with like a complete wet room kind of thing. Pretty small, but it works.
Okay. Yeah.
But so I had to research a bunch of that on my own because my contractor did his best, but didn't have that prior knowledge of how to build for accessibility, and they're hard to find.
Yes.
We consulted with a real estate agent who was specialized in accessible properties, but in the end, my dear friend Mark Curtin, the hockey player, was also a real estate agent, so he and his wife Lisa
Oh,
helped
okay.
us with, and of
Nice.
course, there's sort of comfort in that because he
Yeah.
also knew what ALS was all about, and she did too. So a lot of details that you had to fuss through, and YouTube was good, and community was good, right? Asking other people what they'd done. And at the time,
Yeah.
a lady named Teresa out in Seattle, her and her husband, who has ALS, started a YouTube series interviewing people about accessible design things, like stuff you don't
Okay.
think about, like the register grates on the floor for your furnace if you have forced air heating.
Okay. Yeah.
You drive over those with a 450-pound wheelchair, they get kind of bent, and you don't want to fall in the hole. So we have
Yeah.
all of
Right.
our registers are a special kind that's kind of flush with the floor and very clean and
Okay.
able to support the weight. But so I
Yeah.
became a little mini subcontractor during the renovation, trying to finesse all those things. And we actually had a lady who was a interior designer help us. She came up with some brilliant things because our hallway wasn't big enough to turn into the bathroom with the wheelchair.
Oh.
Like there wasn't enough space to make the turn,
Okay.
even with a 36-inch door. So she came up with the idea of knocking out the wall there and putting smaller double doors so I'd have a swing space, which turned out to be a huge bonus because that's now also my semi-private hospital room in the sense
Okay.
that we have a couple of adjustable beds in there. But you
Nice.
accumulate a lot of stuff with ALS too, equipment. So
Right.
can't park in the garage because we need.
Yeah. You need room in there too. Through the ALS clinic that you go to at Sunnybrook, do you see an occupational therapist there?
My clinic is pretty amazing in that it's a very full multidisciplinary clinic. Not all of
Hmm.
the clinics in Ontario, not all of the clinics in Canada have that same depth of service, although many do.
Right.
Many do. And the
Right.
OT, I think, is essential, in my view.
Yeah, I mean, I do too, and I wondered, like your OT, if that was a person who did provide some help in terms of figuring out the things you needed to do in your home.
Well, it's interesting now that I'm at the stage I'm at. So the answer is yes, absolutely. But the clinic OTs don't come on site. Community OTs will. And
Okay.
so when I started engaging with Ontario Health at Home, which is the entry
Hmm.
point agency that fronts all the services that are delivered by the Ontario healthcare system for home care, a community OT came to the home, did a whole. Everything was done by this point. But had I known, we probably could have consulted with them. My daughter's an OT though, so we were able to
Oh,
tap
okay.
into the family
Oh, that's
resource
really
as
good.
well.
Yeah,
She was
good.
helpful in providing resources and advice also.
Yeah.
But OTs, like every other, are specialized too, and not every professional has experience in all
Hmm.
aspects of things because they may work with children or they may work with adults with learning disabilities or whatever. So the needs are different.
Yeah, not
Um,
everybody knows about what the needs of an ALS patient
yeah,
necessarily. Like, not everybody that's an OT. Yeah.
but the
Right.
OT community has just been phenomenally supportive. Um,
Hmm.
Very delightful experiences. And then this week, because I started with PSW service, personal service worker support at
Yep.
home, one of the nurses with the firm that's providing the staffing for that came to the home as well to do an inspection through a nurse's lens. Very
Okay.
similar kind of things. Like, is Rick able to take his medication? Does Rick have a safe place to toilet and bathe? And all these kind of things around my personal safety and the safety of the workers as well, right? We can't put them in a situation. I mean, there's very subtle things like we can all go to a local furniture store and buy an adjustable bed, but if you're going to have workers come into the house to help you be turned in bed, be dressed in bed, be bathed in bed, be exercised in bed, the bed needs to be able to raise to a height that they can work safely without hurting themselves.
Mhm. Yeah, right.
Adjustable
Right.
Yeah,
beds, typical consumer adjustable bed doesn't raise up like a quote unquote medical bed does.
that's
So
right.
these are things you don't think about unless you ask.
Right.
Right, absolutely. Rick also found his OT very helpful in regards to wheelchair fitting. The kinds of power wheelchairs often required for a person with ALS are expensive devices in the price range of your typical vehicle. Thankfully, most jurisdictions provide some form of government support to help cover that cost, and private insurance will sometimes cover the difference as well. However, getting the wheelchair is only part of the battle. While it may fit comfortably to begin with, loss of muscle mass over time can drastically change the fit of the device.
Once you have a kind of a custom fitted power wheelchair, at some point it doesn't fit you well anymore because your muscles are getting weaker, so you need to get adjustments made. So at the 2-year mark, I actually got a new backrest and some other modifications because it was just hurting me. Now it's much more
Right.
supportive than it.
One of Rick's roles with ALS Action Canada is to lead and moderate a bi-weekly online support group for people with ALS, available to patients free of charge.
Support groups are interesting. The first thing I discovered was they're not for everyone. There's a certain cross
Okay.
section of people who are rightly in denial. They'll admit it. It's not a secret. And my own doctor at one point jokingly said, it's not so bad, Rick. It's not a bad thing to have a bit of denial in your situation. Some people want to continue with their life as it is for as long as they can and not deal with that bogey monster in the background. And I
Yep.
respect that totally. And because when you come to a support group, there's a good likelihood you're going to run into people in the group and see people in the group that are in much more advanced states than you are. So I respect that fully, but we try and make the group that I'm fortunate to moderate as open and welcoming and laid back and funny and casual and easy as possible to take a bit of the edge off of that. We have participants who are nonverbal. We have participants who aren't even on screen because they're trached and they're in a chair and it's just not convenient to hold the device, you know,
Yep.
and we love it. The virtual meeting tools, of course, give you the ability to have a sidebar chat and closed captioning, which is really marvelous at interpreting the ALS voice some people get when their speech
Oh,
starts to
okay.
become
Yeah.
impaired. It does a very good
Yep.
job. So we try and make it as accommodating as possible. I think one of the small challenges is when you've got people using eye gaze technology to type, it takes a
Hmm.
while to get a message out. And so to leave space for them to be part of the meeting and not feel left out or not feel like they're not being listened to give time for them to respond. If you see the question show up in the chat, to be able to get the conversation back to that, because when you got a bunch of people, it tends to be a bit freewheeling and hard to keep on track.
The eye gaze technology Rick refers to allows people with limited voice and motor control to communicate through computer devices. Cameras or sensors detect reflections from the eyes, which then determine where on the screen a user is looking. Eye gaze technology can serve as a vital augmentative and alternative communication tool for individuals with ALS.
So I started going early on. I started attending the ALS Canada where I am. It's a monthly call. Some provinces, they actually have them in person still, which is, I think some
Oh,
people find that really, really good. I do attend some of the US support groups as well, which are
okay.
interesting because the issues tend to be different, focused on, especially on the insurance side, focused on much different topics. But I've come to learn that, the differences around how the way veterans are treated both in Canada and the US and how impactful our system of medicine and public health is compared to, let's say, the United States, where the experience is very much different person by person, state by state, depending on their income and their age and everything else. We have that here too, of course, age dependencies and things. But anyhow, the difference in our group is that I'm not a social worker, not a trained professional. Mark Curtin was actually the moderator host of the meeting before, and he's got a lively sense of humor and a poorly defined sense of boundaries. As a hockey player, I think the dressing room
Right.
chatter was a little bit, outside of some people's comfort zone. Uh, we'd get into discussions of all manner of living with ALS, toileting in the
Okay.
extreme to how to travel with a bidet toilet seat to a hotel. Mark liked to tell the story of his hockey buddies would swapped out the hotel toilet seat for one of these portable bidet
Okay.
toilet seats in much more detail than we wanted to know. But it became a
Oh, boy.
recurring story. So to the point where we'd have a almost a running gag at our meetings. As soon as Mark started to take the topic that way, I'd cry out and scream for him to stop and everybody to put their headphones on. Unbeknownst to me, he started saying, "Oh, Rick, maybe you can schedule the next call for me because I'm really busy. My hands aren't working good." And then it was, "Oh, I can't make the next meeting. Can you moderate or host?" And then it became, "Can you maintain the mailing list?" I sort of just slid into this role. It wasn't what I
Yes.
was looking for, wasn't what I was
Mhm.
necessarily comfortable for, but now that we've sort of developed our guidelines, it's really worked out well for those who choose to attend. And anybody who wants to attend can just send an email to community@alsactioncanada.org, and I'll pick that up hopefully quickly, or just to rick@alsactioncanada.org, and we'll add you to the list. There's no obligation to attend. There's no obligation to speak. People can have their cameras on or off, although most people have them on because we become quite good friends virtually because we're sharing intimate details of our lives and our existence with each other. It's a very vulnerable space, right?
Sure.
Not a lot of crying in our group because we try to keep things kind of positive and
Hmm.
upbeat, and we laugh a lot. And, there's a whole dark sense of
Yeah.
humor that comes with having a terminal illness that can only be shared with other people with the illness. It doesn't go over
Yeah.
well with friends and family so much, but amongst ourselves, we can have a good laugh sometimes at our own expense.
Yeah, that's good.
Rick tells us that meetings with his support group range from as few as 6 to 8 people to over 20, depending on the week. Rick works hard to try to ensure his support group represents people from across the country, though this can be difficult as people can't always consistently make it to sessions, particularly in the final stages of ALS.
I'll get emails from people. It's like, Rick, hope this email finds you well. I won't be at our next call because, well, I'm choosing the MAID option and I won't be around for the call or any of the future ones. And please pass this on to the community on my behalf. Those are just heart wrenching because they come out of the blue. You're just sitting there and all of a sudden, bing, and there's the headline.
Yeah.
Or the ones
Right.
that are, if you've received this email, Rick, it's because I've already passed on.
Okay.
It's tough.
Yeah, that is hard, Rick. Jeez. Obviously, you're developing relationships with these people,
But
and
not just me, we're
yeah.
developing with each other. So
Well,
it's
yeah,
well
yeah,
for the whole community.
yeah, 100%.
The other week, I got an email from one of my US groups that said, please don't read this email if you're not in a good space. It's like, well, of course, we're all going to open that one right away. And of
Yeah.
course, somebody had passed on that we all loved. It was a kind of a key
Yeah.
person in a group. The other challenge then is dealing with that, dealing with the loss, helping give space for that in a meeting so people can talk about the person and
Hmm.
honor them a little bit as much as they wish. And then,
Yes.
and then also recruiting. It's a great club. It's a club nobody wanted to join, but once you're in it, it's lovely. It's just such a beautiful community of people with ALS. So
Yeah.
supportive and so caring. You got to keep recruiting because we keep losing members.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
That's good. Like, getting the word out about it, right?
It's difficult to explain to somebody who's just been diagnosed that there's a group and it's a community group and it's people just like you and you can come and talk, and like it's intimidating, right? It can be
Yeah.
intimidating to be vulnerable and be
Yeah.
transparent in community, but it's very, very powerful. I get messages from the partners, the caregivers, and it's reinforced in our own feedback during the calls that people really, really value these calls far more than I understand. In some sense, it's just a coffee chat. We hang out together for an hour and a half every other week,
Hmm.
but people have called it my therapy session. We don't do therapy. We don't do medical advice. When we talk
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
these things, and maybe that's in
Sure.
itself therapy, right?
It is, there's that connection between you and the other folks, which for all of us, just that social connection, but especially like, sure, when folks have ALS and maybe they can't get out the same way, or friends aren't coming to visit as much anymore or at all anymore, all these sorts of things, right?
That's an interesting angle, Haley. The whole issue of friends and contact, because it does change. You may have
Yes.
seen
Yeah.
this if you know people with cancer or other illnesses. Your whole social world gets turned upside down. I don't know if you've seen that personally, but people don't know how to interact with people who are ill.
No, you're right. Not everyone does. And if I just think back to my mom, like, I mean, certainly my mom and dad's, some of their best friends were like so important in their lives throughout the entire ALS journey. Like their next door neighbors, Floss and Ivan, two of the most amazing people ever. And they stuck by them through everything. And other neighbors did as well, and other friends. I do remember there was one particular friend that my mom had. My mom was pretty active. Like she did a lot of Tai Chi, and she was into sewing, and she just was, had friends in different groups. This was a lady who was part of the Tai Chi group. And I think she was about 10 years older than my mom. They kind of had this little friend group, right? And the other ladies just kept saying, I remember one of them coming up to me at my mom's funeral and saying, the one woman, she'd never gone to visit my mom. And my mom had kind of commented on that. I wonder how she's doing and I miss seeing her. And, I wonder what she's up to. She'd come visit because the other ladies did. But she just was struggling so much with this idea that, like, she basically thought to herself, it should be me that's dying, not Judy. She might have even been 15 years younger than this friend. So yeah, this particular person, I can't remember her name. I never met her. But yeah, this poor woman, I think, really struggled with it. Like
I understand it. It's like, I mean,
Yeah.
I was one of those people who didn't know how to talk to people with illnesses, somebody with cancer or somebody with a terminal illness. What do you say? Like, hey, how's it going? You know, so, and even when
Yeah.
people ask me that now, it's like, hey, I'm doing pretty good, all things considered. And I think people sometimes are afraid to ask questions like that they're burning
Yes.
on their mind about what is this like, and can you feel something, and do you hurt, and what is
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
like? How's
Sure.
your head, and how's your faith,
Yeah.
and like all these things that people want to unpack, and not everybody has the courage to ask those kind of questions. So I try and use little tricks and techniques to let people feel at ease and know that they can ask and that I'm open to that. And
Yeah.
part of
Good.
that is just being positive and being upbeat about things. So I sometimes maybe exaggerate a little too much how well I'm doing when I'm not really, just to give people
Right.
the permission to engage. Because if you come visit me for a coffee and we're sitting on the couch and I got my feet up, I look just like Flynn sitting there, right? Well, maybe not just like Flynn, but I'm a little older. He's better looking than me. But 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 you wouldn't
Yeah.
know that, I can barely brush my teeth anymore, or
Yeah.
Right.
can't
Yeah.
stand up and all these kind of things, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
it is interesting. And that's a real struggle for some people with ALS, the loss of their friend community. And the other thing that our community group does then is it I often hear people say, we can talk about things here that I can't talk about with my caregiver or I can't talk about with my family. And I so appreciate having the space to discuss that.
But it is a really wonderful, like, service, essentially, right? Like, yeah,
Absolutely.
Well, that's
it
why I love
really
your
is.
podcast so much too, because this is a
Oh,
way to give
thanks, Rick.
voice to no, it's a way to give voice to
Yeah.
things that otherwise would be unsaid or not understood, and that helps. That's part of the awareness is just helping people understand. The most empathetic people I meet in my life now are the ones who've also experienced something in their own life journey with parents or friends or something, and
Right.
it opens up this sense of empathy that if you haven't lived through trauma, perhaps is a little bit more latent.
Could be. I mean, I could 100% say for myself, like, my mom's illness changed me significantly.
No
Um,
doubt, no doubt.
so, yeah.
Rick was involved as a subject in a project called Flickering Souls Illuminating ALS, created by Eric Brunner, a Philadelphia-based artist with ALS. The project is on display at Parkway Central Library in Philadelphia as of January 31st, 2026.
It's remarkable. It's a story in its own, and I think it's not getting enough attention yet. Eric Brunner is a guy down in the Philadelphia area who
Okay.
married with kids. He has ALS. He was an artist, and so at some point he was moved to create some sort of tribute to reflect ALS. So his vision was to create this light panel. I think it's about 8 feet tall, 8 feet wide, of various faces of ALS. So he just put out a simple call on social media with a bit of a deadline saying, send me a picture of your face and I'll include you in my artwork. It was that simple. Tell me a bit about your story. I'm putting this art piece together. So it's just a grid box with lights in behind. And then he has this
Mhm.
3D printing thing that he can print our faces in monochrome on a plastic panel. And that gets put up in the grid. There's this entire 3 panel work that you can see on Eric Bruner's Facebook and Instagram pages. It's in a gallery now in Philadelphia. Just this weekend opened up. He was putting it together in his garage with the help of friends. And as he lost function, it took longer and longer than he imagined. And he had to
Okay.
crowdsource a little bit for some funding. But I think
Yeah.
now that it's done, we'd really like to see that thing go on the road, if even
Oh, that's a
possible.
great idea.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's also been really rewarding to see posts from people I know in the U.S. ALS community who've gone already in person and represented.
Okay.
It's just a really beautiful piece of work and yeah, just very touching. I don't know how impactful it is outside the community, but I think anything that brings witness to something is
Oh,
useful,
yeah.
and for Eric himself to be able to channel his artistic stuff
Yeah.
towards ALS has
Yeah.
been probably powerful for him.
Yeah, it's pretty beautiful. And in terms of raising awareness, what a great way to do it. So,
Hmm.
With cross country equity and accessibility to ALS research and care in mind, one thing I've noticed is that there haven't been many participants from the East Coast in the Cali program over the past 2 years. I asked Rick if he had any thoughts as to why this may be.
just one thing that I've noticed, I mean, in the Cali, and I just wonder what you think about this. Like, there's less participation from folks on the East Coast. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that, like why that might be. I saw for, I guess it's ALS Action Canada, your advisory council, is it?
Yeah,
Dr. Colleen O'Connell's on there, so I know she's in Nova Scotia, right? So yeah, it's just interesting to me, like, why, where are these folks?
it could be just population density, and it could
Okay,
be the ALS societies of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, the ALS Society in Newfoundland. I believe they're doing a good enough job in covering the local community that maybe people
right,
don't feel a need to kind of extend beyond that. There's also the just getting the word out, I think. And then
right, okay,
perhaps a little bit of there is still this sort of people don't fully understand what's the difference between my local ALS society and ALS Canada, or
gotcha.
ALS Action Canada for that matter. So
Right, yeah,
um,
yeah,
we're working really hard to try and foster collaboration from many sides, to
yeah,
cooperate and work together so that we're not duplicating efforts, we're not wasting resources, and
yeah.
we can work to our strengths.
Currently, there are only a few medications approved by Health Canada for the treatment of ALS. One is Riluzole, sold under the trade name Rilotec. This medication's exact mechanism of action is not fully known, but it's thought that it blocks glutamate signaling in nerve cells. Glutamate is a neurotransmitter, a type of messenger molecule released by nerve cells for cell-to-cell communication. When released in excess, glutamate is believed to contribute to motor neuron degeneration. As a result, reduction of glutamate levels is speculated to slow progression of ALS symptoms. Another approved medication is edaravone, sold under the brand name Radicava. An oral formulation of Radicava was approved in 2022, and while its mechanism of action in ALS is not fully understood, it is a known antioxidant and is theorized to reduce oxidative stress in motor neurons. Lastly, tofersen, sold under the brand name Qalsody, is a medication administered via spinal injection into the cerebrospinal fluid. Tofersen is specifically for those with ALS caused by the SOD1 gene variant, a known cause of familial ALS. Riluzole and edaravone slow progression by a matter of months, not years. Therefore, staying up to date on new medications and clinical trials is crucial for the ALS community. Rick knows this as well as anyone, as he has worked with a team at ALS Action Canada to submit a patient input document to Canada's drug agency regarding tofersen. For people who want to stay up to date on these kinds of things and want to get into this sort of research, but don't have any experience with that kind of thing, I think it can feel very overwhelming. Like the idea for me, for example, of reading a paper on a clinical trial, it's going to go over my head, is how I feel. So my question is if you have any suggestions or resources for people who want to get into that but feel overwhelmed by the idea of it.
I think there's a couple of avenues for sure. Taking advantage of the Cali if you're in Canada, or the Curly if you're in the US and do the NEALS program, which Cali was based on, is great if you can afford that investment of a bunch of days of your time to become smarter. I also deep dive by getting not textbooks, but layperson. They're written by professionals, but they're for lay audience of, what are cells all about? What are prions all about? What is the
Yeah,
brain all about? And just trying to get a little bit smarter that way. We're blessed in our LS Action Canada group to have people, pharmacists, people who've been involved with the drug industry, PhD level. So lots of bright
yes,
lights and lots of regular folks who have other specialties who can, bring all these ideas together and help focus our efforts. I find personally, webinars are phenomenal. Sometimes
yeah.
the content is
Mhm.
very much over my head, but Niels has webinars. What used to be the Northeast ALS Alliance, NEALS, now they're renamed because they're broader. Everything ALS is an organization that has
I like
webinars
those
every
ones.
week.
Yeah, those are
There's other
good.
ones put on by various ALS societies, and ALS Canada, of course, has an ongoing series of webinars with Dr. Dave Taylor that unpacks clinical trial stuff, and sometimes has special speakers on from the industry talking about recent developments. Your own neurology team or your own clinic team obviously can tell you about clinical trials that they're supporting in their hospital, provide you with the documentation around what's involved with that. There is a group run by a lady named Nadia Sethi, and it's the ALS Clinical Trials private group, which you could become a member of, which is a very good forum for discussing drug developments in a rational, sane kind of way with some very smart
Nice.
people. I really enjoy that one. There's a community on Slack that has been put together by the infamous Brooke Eby. She worked for Salesforce, which has a connection with Slack. So Slack is just the tool, but there's basically an online community for
Mhm.
ALS people that everybody's free to join. It's fairly intimate. There's only about 1,500 members, and so we tend to develop online relationship there too. The very early clinical trials, the phase one, phase zero, phase one, phase two kind of things, they're not there to test efficacy so much as
Right.
initial safety and dosage stuff. But there might be some signal that comes out of it that says looks promising, and that gets amplified a bit too much, and it builds false hope, and it gets very difficult
Yeah.
for people with ALS to say, "Is this real? Is this going to happen? Is this going to save my life?" Don't
Yeah,
even,
yeah.
and you don't want to be the person that says, "Hey, even if it did work wonderfully, it's still going to take many years to get through the regulatory approvals and get into market commercially." So this is part of the balance of getting involved in clinical trials too. So I've seen people engaged in clinical trials without having all that prior knowledge, and I think that's okay too because they trust their neurologist and they're at a place where they want to latch on to the hope that comes with being part of a clinical trial. That's not wrong, but they are first and
Right.
foremost scientific experiments. So
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
but I think, understand your sources, make sure you're getting them from reliable places, and ask questions.
When we asked Rick what non ALS related topic he might like to speak about, he immediately brought up his lifelong passion for cycling.
Like many people, right? Got a bike as a kid, didn't think I could ride it. Then all of a sudden I looked behind me and my dad wasn't holding onto the seat anymore. And I was like, I'm riding, I'm riding. Now I look at my grandkids in age 2 or 3 and they're using these bikes without the pedals and they're up on 2 wheels and not using training wheels or anything. So it's pretty exciting to see the cycling continue generation after generation. I never was into bike racing and stuff like that. I just wasn't a competitive kind of person that way. I did have a speed bike when I was a teenager.
Okay.
Some memorable things from my biking life were driving into a chain across the road in the dusk light and
Oh.
having the bike stop and me continue
Oh.
on overhead. I survived that one quite fine. But
No.
and of course, biking in the woods is always really fun because you're
Oh,
navigating
yeah.
all the stumps and roots and holes while at the same time
It's a
trying to enjoy
challenge.
the lake and the scenery. And
Yeah.
where we used to live, there was a trail that had been cut in the woods by a bunch of kids with ups and downs and jumps. So I liked going there with my grandson and filming him while he did all the daredevil stuff, and I just watched.
Yeah,
A lot
that
better
sounds
that
good.
way. But my
Yeah.
final biking adventure came just prior to my diagnosis. We were biking in our neighborhood, and I was coming to the end of the ride, so I sat up on my seat, took my hands off the bars, and my seat post broke. And so I literally just fell off the back of the bike, flat on my back at speed.
Oh gosh.
Ended up ripping my rotator cuff. At the time, your adrenaline is surging. It was like, I'm okay, I'm okay. About a half hour later, it's like, I'm not okay. I need to go to the hospital. Ended
Gosh.
up getting surgery during one of the last surgeries that was scheduled in that hospital before COVID closed it down. Literally the last one that day before they sent the nurses home. And then I'm trying to recover from it, doing my little physio stuff, and I started getting the cramps and the fasciculations in bed.
Mm,
And so I'm
Oh.
trying to recover. I'm supposed to be taking it careful, and the cramps in my legs were so bad that I had to fall out of bed on my knees, and my arms stayed up on the bed, and it was so painful. To this day, I
mm,
wonder whether I didn't damage it a bit, but neither here nor there. But
Yeah.
so cycling and ALS come kind of full circle. My only regret is I never did the velodrome. In Milton, Ontario, there's a velodrome that
Oh, okay.
you could go and get an assist to go around the course. That would
I
have been
see.
fun, but
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, can't look back, right? Got to be
yeah.
positive.
Before we parted ways, Rick left us with a beautiful message of hope.
Hope is all we have. So I think hope is hugely important. Dr. Richard Bedlack out of North Carolina has a whole webinar series or message that he keeps delivering about how important hope is and a positive outlook and remaining positive and surrounding yourself by a supportive community is to managing the disease. It's really important. There's a lot of downside. There's lots of things to deal with. There's challenges every day, both inside the home and with the system, in terms of support and medication and access and insurance and costs, incredible costs. But we got to stay positive and we got to have hope and keep fighting for the cause. The things I do today aren't probably going to benefit me personally in terms of advocacy or fighting for access for drugs, but I feel like I'm investing in the future lives of people who will come in the future with ALS. And as we fight for a world with a cure, fighting to end ALS.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Incredible. Okay. Love to
Yeah.
hear it.
That's a nice thought to end on. Thanks, Rick.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rick, very much. All right. How was that conversation for you?
I mean, it was fun.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, it was. And I really want to understand more about ALS Action Canada and the ALS Super Fund. And Rick, definitely his explanation helped me to kind of get a bit more of a handle on that. Yeah. I do love my bike. I wasn't sure if he was going to say he was more into cycling, like he was a cyclist and maybe he was more competitive with it. But no, he's just more like me with my bike,
Yeah, and I like, too, that, even though he's not able to cycle anymore, it sounds like he's still able to get joy out of the sport or out of that hobby through his children and his grandchildren, and that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is, yeah. Yeah, and I like hearing about the support group that he moderates. It just sounds like a great spot for folks who are looking for that kind of social support, right, that have ALS. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talked, I can't remember if we spoke about this with Andrew, but I know for sure we talked about it with Leah, is the way that ALS can be isolating. It's a very isolating disease. With Leah, we were speaking more specifically about caregivers and being isolated as a caregiver, but that's perhaps even amplified as a person with ALS, especially as you grow, later in your disease. And if you're more confined to your house or to your bed, yeah, that's very isolating. So for people in that position or at any place in the progression of their disease, being able to get on there and do something social with other people is super important. So I think it's great that it's something online, so it is more easily accessible. I like that Rick talked about the ways that he's very careful when he's moderating to make sure that people who are using different forms of technology to communicate are being given an appropriate amount of time to speak and be invited into the conversation when there are still people who aren't using any devices to speak and can speak with more ease.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it must be a challenge, but a challenge that, they focus on, like he's doing his best to make sure he keeps on top of that so that everybody's voice is going to be heard.
Yeah. And I think it sounds like that's a very important thing for Rick as a person and for ALS Action Canada, is to make sure that every patient's voice is heard in the capacity that they want it to be heard in. And Rick is doing a lot of incredible things. We didn't even get to touch on everything that he's done or is doing because there's just so much of it, and he's pretty darn good at talking about it.
He does like to talk. He likes to talk, which is awesome for a podcast.
It is.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you very much, Rick.
That brings us to the end of today's episode of Originals, More Than ALS. We'd like to extend a huge thank you to Rick Zwiep for joining us and sharing his story.
For more information on ALS Action Canada and the ALS Superfund, go to alssuperfund.ca. Please note the ALS Action Canada website is currently under development, so info on ALS Action Canada is currently being consolidated on the ALS Superfund website. Keep an eye out for when the independent ALS Action Canada website is up and running again.
We recommend checking out the ALS Action Canada and ALS Superfund 2024-2025 Impact Report, available on the ALS Superfund website and linked in the episode description.
To join ALS Action Canada's free online support group, you can send an email to community@alsactioncanada.org or rick@alsactioncanada.org.
For more information on Eric Brunner's project, Flickering Souls, Illuminating ALS, visit ericbrunnerart.com.
For more information on the ALS Therapy Development Institute, visit als.net.
For more information on Brooke Eby's project, ALS Together, visit alstogether.org.
For more information on the Northeast ALS Alliance, visit neals.org. That is NEALS.org.
And finally, for more information on ALS and access to information regarding the Canadian ALS Learning Institute and other online educational options, please visit the ALS Canada website at als.ca.
Thank you so much for listening. Join us again next month where we'll speak to another member of the ALS community about their experiences and the passions that make them more than ALS. Bye for now.